Hey there, it's been a while, hasn't it? No, like, a while. But anyway, TF2's been a bit of an interesting spot lately, hasn't it? Matter of fact, there's been so much interesting stuff happening lately, and I've taken so long to get this video out the door that I've had to rewrite several sections of this video over and over again, including this intro. Don't get me wrong, TF2 was in an absolutely abysmal state for the longest time, and even if we're starting to see a little bit of development now, there's still tons of stuff that I want to talk about. So pardon the clickbaity branding of the video, and bear with me as I try to explain myself, because there's just so many things I want to touch on, and this was just the best framing I could think of. Do these things make any sense? I mean, I hope so. Was this in any way necessary? Absolutely not, but this was still the best outlet that I could think of for this, as opposed to doing the thing that every other white man in his 20s does, which is starting a podcast. Again. Now you may be asking yourself how this stupid motherfucker right here, who hasn't even really been actively playing the game for the past 6 or so years, could have any form of authoritative take on the matter at hand. I mean, it's not like he's checked into the matrix of the game's ecosystem anymore, so surely the takes are gonna be pure garbage, right? And to an extent, you know what? You're probably right. I mean, I don't know what it was like out in the trenches fighting automated antagonists day in and day out. However, I do believe I've actually gained a somewhat outsider's perspective on TF2, because believe it or not, this game is still near and dear to my heart, and I still interface with it very regularly, just in different ways. Now, I might not play TF2 as much anymore, but a lot of friends that I talk to still do, and I get invited to charity events and cast competitive matches and even attend LANs or just follow the general discourse, so I certainly know what's going on around these parts, no matter how jaded I try to sound, and if anything, maybe that's even a sign of the vested interest I still have in this shithole. What I'm trying to say here is that I don't think I actually need to play the game religiously anymore after well over 13 years to still have opinions about it, you know? Look, to really get down to it, I think we have to take a small trip down memory lane to really understand where anything I want to talk about in this way too long piece of shit video actually comes from. Because you see, I'm a product of the 2000s internet. We're talking pretty much completely unrestricted access to a computer with internet since I was like 8 years old. Which, now saying it out loud, makes it a damn miracle that I didn't turn out any worse. So, the year's like 2009, and little dumbass kiddo me just so happens to stumble upon some YouTube videos of this online multiplayer video game called Team Fortress 2. And besides the usual stuff like the animated shorts or YouTube poops or Gmod videos, some of the noteworthy stuff also happens to be some silly gameplay of this silly game mode called Prophunt with Banjo-Kazooie music in the background, or people having the times of their lives in Rocket Dodgeball. Things that didn't really mean anything to me at the time. But we call this foreshadowing. So piquing my interest, I actually went and asked my mom whether my little 11-year-old ass could play this cool new game I just found, knowing full well the answer would be a resounding nah bro, because it was 18 plus and also cost money, so people still cared about age restrictions back then. No harm, no foul. I expected that, so I just went back to playing like Dino Run or Minecraft Classic Mode, you know, like the browser version of Minecraft. Wow, that dredged up a lot of ancient memories. Anyway, we fast forward a couple more years, and actually thanks to a friend I met through a custom server on said version of Minecraft, of all things, I ended up making a Steam account, because playing the cracked version of Terraria through Hamachi wasn't really cutting it anymore when you want all the new updates. And yes, I really did enjoy dumping all these memory deep cuts out. How could you tell? Oh yeah, and also that cool game I heard about a couple years ago just so happened to go free to play recently in like the most defining and important update in the game's history, but whatever, that's just secondary, right? That's just small coincidences and all that. Well, I had access to a PC that could just about barely run video games, and considering the game was free now, I no longer needed to ask for my mom's credit card to partake in the illicit activity of underage gaming. So, after waiting like 2 weeks for the download to finish for what was slow even on 2011 internet, my life would change forever, and here we are. Now, if you're a newer player, you'd probably not be aware of this, but back in my day, we didn't have any matchmaking or any of that fancy stuff. We had quick play, which was broken on a good day, and an archaic piece of ancient technology that probably predates the very engine that the game runs on itself, aka the server browser. Don't quote me on that, by the way, I don't actually know. Valve did have their own servers at the time, obviously, but they were usually more of a last resort if you just wanted to play some completely unaltered bit of TF2, because more often than not, community servers were perfectly fine. Not too heavily modified, actually moderated to keep bad actors out, and most importantly, that whole community aspect. You'd end up favoring some, revisiting them over and over, and end up making friends by just hanging out there. Matter of fact, for the first few years of playing TF2, I barely touched anything official map or server-wise whatsoever. Just hung out on trade servers instead with nothing to trade for, or CP Orange servers. And if you're feeling frisky, you might even end up on something a little bit more off the beaten path, a completely fresh TF2 experience without needing to actually install anything new, which, given my horrendous internet speeds back in the day, was actually a really big deal. You'd end up spending some of the best time of your life there and end up making friends that you still talk to on a regular basis over 12 years later. I still have yet to see the face of one of these motherfuckers, but you know damn well I'm expecting an invitation to his wedding. And if we're talking custom stuff, it's not even the slop like randomizer 100 times all crits. We're talking artisanally made shit that could pass off as a completely different game. And once again, I probably wouldn't have ever found out about this, let alone made friends for life, if it wasn't for just stumbling upon random YouTube videos showcasing the fun that could be had. And here we already touch upon the first problem as well, that being that there just never was any proper discoverability for any of this stuff whatsoever. And as Valve got even more focused on making quick play not break every 2 minutes, they got a lot more restrictive as well. You'd still end up on a community pub from time to time, but even those got phased out in favor of just official servers being accessible eventually. And to be quite fair, there were some truly terrible offenders, so it's not like Valve was purely in the wrong for doing this. But naturally, this also leads you to ask why anybody would even bother opening up a Linux command terminal to find something new or potentially interesting when all you have to do is press a single button and be put into a new pub instantly, right? The writing was on the wall, and I'm retreading ground that is very familiar here because I already stepped on it 8 years ago.
It's a simple fact that many of these game modes are dying down completely. While you still see many servers hosting custom game modes when you scroll down the server list, and the more popular ones being decently populated, many have gone under due to a plain lack of traffic. The main reason as to why this development is happening is yet again because Valve is funneling everything into their own pub servers with quick play.
Honestly, I don't even know who the fuck this guy is, but he makes some really valid points, even if he sounds nothing like me. You hate to see all of the hours of free work people put into making some of the coolest shit you've ever seen in TF2 go completely unrecognized. But it is what it is, so with community servers receding faster than my hairline once I hit the age of 20, Valve decided it was time for the final blow. You already know where this is going. It's by far TF2's most infamous update and the biggest blunder Valve has ever committed when developing this game, the 2016 Meet Your Match update. Now obviously there's the complete travesty that is Valve's competitive matchmaking, which absolutely nobody liked, not even the actual competitive community, whose feedback on how to make competitive TF2 work was pretty much completely disregarded in favor of Valve reinventing the wheel, which also resulted in forever tarnishing the reputation of this mostly small and insular competitive community. And by the way, Valve has never balanced a single weapon with community competitive in mind. If anything, their own version of competitive, but this is so far removed from actual community competitive as it is from 24/7 high tower no cards TF2. But let's not get sidetracked, I'll talk more about this later. Anyways, it also replaced quick play with casual matchmaking, arguably quite a downgrade, at least at launch, due to the fact that it didn't even work at all. But functionally, it's just a more controlled version of what quick play was. You get to choose the maps you queue for, and even do so with some extra friends simultaneously if you so choose. But in exchange, you lose the ability to swap teams at will, Most people will just leave after a single map instead of sticking around for map changes. Most maps will only last like 2 rounds, and you can't just join a server via the server browser or the Steam friends list anymore, and are instead forced to re-queue and pray that you get in a timely manner. Now, I could go on a tangent about how matchmaking is a scourge on modern multiplayer gaming and saps any sense of community or goodwill out of people, because there's no real incentive to act like a decent human being when you'll never see the people you're playing with ever again after the end of a match, which results in tacked on report systems to try and punish people for bad behavior, unless it's TF2, and a complete lack of instantaneous or reliable moderation in favor of automated systems. But it is the industry standard for a reason. I can't really blame devs for implementing it, because it does streamline the whole starting the game, getting into a game pipeline, and I'm going on a tangent, aren't I? Casual was probably not as bad for TF2 as the nostalgic boomer in me makes it out to be. It was probably a necessary modernization to keep the game running more smoothly in the modern era of live service games. But it is also the direct cause of almost every problem that plagues the game today. Like, was Meet Your Match a misstep in hindsight? Well, yeah, of course, it's very easy to see, like, 8 years later, that it indeed was. But it's not like we could undo it now anyways. And don't get me wrong, criticizing it is completely fine, that's what I just did, and wishing for a better world is always nice as well. But realistically, we all know nothing's gonna happen, right? Valve doesn't give a shit, and clearly could never admit to a mistake that is this drastic. Hey, here I am again, re-recording another part of this video for like the 4th time now, and I'm not even gonna jump in front of the camera for this one, but originally I was gonna go on a little bit more about how I thought that demanding Valve reverts casual back to quick play the exact old way might be a little too outlandish of a claim to make, because it's just so astronomically unlikely that Valve would give enough of a shit to do something like that. But clearly they've showed themselves willing to actually work on TF2 again in recent times. I mean, they just unmuted free-to-plays, for example, right? So maybe there's like a glimmer, like a slight hope that maybe something like that could actually happen with TF2 again. And if you told me about that in like 2019, I would have called you a big fat liar, because there's no realistic chance that would have ever happened. But times have changed, I suppose, and here we are. Turns out, by the way, that complaining to the provider of your product when you want the product to improve and they want your money still kind of like works sometimes. It just takes a little bit, and who knows what could have possibly brought this upon us, but I guess we're in for an interesting time nonetheless. Now, do I think that this means that Valve will actually revert casual back to a quick play-like system, 1-to-1, just a 180 turn because the code's already there and stuff? I don't know, I don't think so. I still think that there's a low chance that that would happen. There might be some smaller changes in the pipeline that they could potentially drop at some point, and I can see them improving the system if there's enough demand for it, which I think is really the only big thing left at this point, right? But realistically, I don't see it happening just lickety-split directly back to what quick play was, because at the end of the day, now we have an entire generation of players that never even knew the old system. TF2 has had matchmaking for almost as long as it hasn't had it now. Or, you know, at least something like that. And you know times are truly desperate if we're out here romanticizing a system that at the end of the day was still pretty dog shit, just because it's slightly less dog shit than what we have currently. I mean, we even have community efforts trying to bring back quick play in some ways, however ill-advised that may be. Anyway, we fast forward another year or so, TF2 gets its last ever major update, and Valve stops caring, and here we are. Now, with everything I've said so far, I'm just trying to lay the groundwork for what's to come, because in a cruel, ironic twist of fate, the legacy of matchmaking and the resulting erosion of community service has actually given way to a fascinating state of affairs. That being that Valve effectively hands the game to the community in its entirety. I mean, even before they stopped having any input on updates, most of the content was already community made, right? Be that cosmetics, maps, even game modes, and now in more recent times, even bug fixes that are community submitted, and the actual code, matter of fact, being worked on by a third-party contractor instead of actual Valve employees. So really, the game is community run at this point. In all but name. Valve occasionally might give their seal of approval if they can be asked to care that day, but that's it. Honestly, it's kind of genius when you consider that nobody at Valve even has any reason or incentive to work on TF2 anymore. Like, seriously, think about this open culture that they used to have there, right? Not anymore, mind you, but still. If you could work on games played by millions of people where you will immediately have your work recognized by a larger player base, or, I don't know, cutting-edge technology like fucking brain chips, you would probably rather work on that than the 20-year-old piece of crap with a codebase messier and more antique than any ethnic conflict in the Balkans. Instead, you just get some suckers to do it for essentially free or paltry sums of money if they happen to get lucky, and you reap the rewards of people shutting the fuck up for a few months. And it's not like there's really much of a financial incentive either, no matter how popular you consider TF2 to still be, because it absolutely pales in comparison to the infinite money machine they just have standing in the basement. They seem to care just about enough to do some very basic maintenance, because more money is always nice, and the suckers, aka the player base, keep buying keys regardless. But yeah, even with the move away now from that open culture and actual leadership teams that assign people to work on stuff, clearly nobody at Valve considers maintaining TF2 past the absolute lowest possible feasible amount even a reasonable thing to do. Not to mention that TF2 is essentially a dead game in the public eye. Look, I know people have been touting TF2 as dead for years, even when it was still being actively updated, so it kind of just became background noise after a while. But really, if you ask the average person, even somebody who's played the game or at least knows of it, their response more than likely will be, oh, people still play that? It may still have a decently sized player base compared to many other live services to date, even if you disregard a lot of them as bots, but it's by no means massive anymore, no matter how much the remaining players still care for the game. It is undoubtedly a niche game by modern standards, and just to give you a little bit more of existential dread, it's basically on the verge of being able to be considered a retro game, depending on how you would define it. We are not getting any younger, and neither is this game.
Anyway, so it was actually kind of incredible of Valve to throw us a little bone with vScript and its ability to allow map creators far greater control and customization of their maps. Hell, we've already seen recreations of classic game modes or novel ideas within the limitations of vScript, right? They might be a little compromised, sure, but the ability for stuff like this to exist at all without any third-party server plugins whatsoever would have blown my mind 10 years ago. You know, like handing a medieval serf the ability to AI generate a deepfake of whoever's god grace-given leader they were enslaved to. Does that work? And anyway, I actually think we're only just scratching the surface of what this is capable of. The possibilities are boundless in comparison to the stagnant dredge of the 218th payload map.
Have a seat. It's about to get a little bit more serious, because this actually segues really neatly into the next thing I want to touch on, which also happened to serve as a major impetus to get me collecting my thoughts in the first place and make this video. That being the reactions that a lot of people had when vScript versions of Prophunt maps were uploaded to the Steam Workshop a little while ago. Now personally, that didn't really matter all that much to me, because if I really wanted to play Prophunt, I could always just hop on a community server and probably end up having a less compromised and better overall experience. But it's still cool as hell that it exists, and the fact that the people that worked so hard on making it at least have a chance now of getting some sort of compensation or recognition for it is pretty epic. I also just so happen to know some of them personally, so take that as you will, yada yada, full disclosure, not like it really matters. But what really surprised me were the reactions people had to these maps being uploaded. The sheer amount of pure anger and hatred directed to something so inane and simple really struck me and got me thinking. So much so that I genuinely struggled to comprehend why people were reacting this way and asked them to explain their opinions and their views on this. So now I get to dismantle every single one of these arguments like a year later when everybody's completely forgotten about the discourse. Let's start small. The first one that people have brought up is a just bloat of game menus and file sizes and overall content saturation, and you know what?
fair enough. To an extent, I can see that. It is certainly not unreasonable. However, I would also argue that at least in terms of file sizes, TF2 is still far from the worst offender nowadays. For instance, my TF2 installation with years upon years upon years worth of custom stuff from community servers is like 50 gigabytes? Which is perfectly in line with most modern games nowadays and still a lot better than a lot of Western game offenders. And do bear in mind, that is a decade's worth of custom stuff from servers that aren't even around anymore. Just old maps and stuff that nobody even knows exists. A clean install is like a fraction of the size, right? So I really don't think this is much of a problem in the grand scheme of things, especially when you consider how cheap storage space is nowadays as well. But as far as the menus are concerned or the content saturation, I can't really rebuke that. That is definitely the case with how long the game has been around. However, I would also hazard to say that that is probably more subjective and may differ person to person. I, for one, always like getting more bang for my buck, even if in this specific example, both the game and the content are completely free. And even if I don't like it or necessarily have to interface with it at all, it's nice that it's around. I don't see a downside in having more stuff, even if it isn't for me, but more on that later. Now, the next point that people brought up was that the existence of a game mode like Prophunt would have to be justifiable within the lore of TF2, and I found this point fascinating because I didn't know people actually gave a fuck about TF2's lore. Like, that shit is even more obtuse than any FromSoft game ever made, because at least in those you can still read an in-game item description to get some niche bit of lore info. For TF2, you literally have to go out of your way to watch promotional videos and read out-of-game comics that were never even finished. You see, this is where taking forever to finish a video almost becomes comedy in and of itself, because when I wrote that statement, it was still true. The final comic was nowhere to be seen. But as everybody's obviously well aware of by now, the final issue is out, it's been finished, and it's quite heartwarming actually to see this story finally wrapped up, even if it took them over 7 years to do so. But hey, Valve works in crazy ways. Anyway, back on point. I've always been under the impression that as cool and interesting as TF2's lore and world building are, which they are by the way, they've never really mattered too much when it comes to the actual gameplay aspects of the game and exist more as a backdrop than anything. Though, I'm also a serial story disrespecter in games. It's always been gameplay first to me, so this could also just be subjective again. Like, you can explain the settings of a map in the lore, but maybe the map creators and Valve themselves just thought it'd be sick to have a map set in a Japanese shrine, right? I feel like you could even invoke an argument similar to the art style that's just been talked about to death at this point, where if it can be deviated from this far and without explanation, then does the lore really matter that much? How do you even explain the zany banana hat? If you can, then why wouldn't a wacky game mode fit into TF2 either? Like, this game's lore is completely fucking unhinged. Literally anything is explainable. Now I understand that this is basically what these people asked for anyway, some sort of simple lore explanation as to why, because you can explain it in the lore, but I feel like that's also just a roundabout way of saying that you don't really care about maps like this, which is fine, but you know, it seems like a roundabout way of putting it. I'm gonna be compiling a few points into one here because while they obviously differ, I still feel like I can address them in a batch. And starting with the idea that it splits the player base further and thus will cause the game modes to be dead within a few weeks, that's not fully discreditable. I agree that this could actually be an issue, but with the player base as quote-unquote high as it is, I doubt that this is a great issue, right? I plan on going into more detail on how we address this a little bit later, so let's just leave it at I kind of disagree with this for now and move on. It would only really be fun with friends is a very solid point if you don't have friends or hate having fun, but that's secondary. The only completely fair point is about lower density regions. I can't really argue against that. If you live in South America, Southeast Asia, or Africa, etc., you're probably fucked, yeah. But I'd suppose you're also already used to this if you grew up in these areas and played less popular games. You're just inevitably used to low player counts or having to play on a higher ping. But content like this would completely be null and void for you, and yeah, I accept that. However, because of the same exact argument, one could also argue that these regions make up a lower percentage of the player base, So if a larger portion of the player base still benefits from new content, there's almost like a utilitarian type of view to be made here, right? This stands as more of like a devil's advocate type statement, because I don't actually agree with this. Matter of fact, I'm gonna argue against it a little bit later, but I still thought it warranted mentioning nonetheless. And now for the big one, the fact that stuff like this isn't core TF2. That it would be too far removed from the base game and what people expect out of TF2, and that people would much rather just want some solid, basic core maps instead. This was by far the most common take that I saw, and having listened to me yap for the last little while, you know why I take some issues with this, but let's start small, right? Okay, so you want more core TF2 maps like payload or control points. That's completely fair. Sure, but I can guarantee you your ass won't be playing these anymore after like 2 weeks either. Don't lie to yourself. I know what it's like. We're all animals of habit, and after the novelty of the new map wears off and you realize some small issues with it, you'd rather just go back to queuing for bad water and upward again. I know this is purely anecdotal on my part, but if you queue for every map in the game, you're probably never ending up on most of them. Whenever I do pub on Uncletopia, which I did even before the bots were ever an issue because I refused to play casual, the server just rotates through the same like 10 maps. People just like what they know, and that's just how it is. But the big point really is that it isn't core TF2, it's too far removed and belongs in something like Gmod instead. And boy, is this a difficult one to address, because while I disagree, I can't just dismiss something that is effectively subjective opinion. In my opinion, TF2 is more of a platform than just a single game. Okay, well, maybe not to the same extent as actual platform games like Roblox, Fortnite, or Gmod are. It just doesn't have the same tools or incentives for creators, but it still carries a lot of similar elements. The game may have been designed with one core gameplay loop in mind like 20 years ago, but that sure has changed over time, hasn't it? You might get thousands of hours of enjoyment out of this core gameplay loop, but surely eventually you get a little bored of it and want to switch it up, right? Most people would just boot up a different game for a novel experience nowadays, but especially back in the day as a kid, it was insanely awesome to just be able to boot up the same game I already knew in and out and have a new and interesting experience, especially when you have little disposable money. Even if you completely disregard community efforts, there's still plenty of official offerings to take you away from the core TF2 gameplay loop. Stuff like Manpower, MVM, or Pastime exists for people who are interested in digging just a little bit deeper. This is just a weak point by itself. I obviously understand that these aren't as popular as core TF2 for a plethora of reasons, well, apart from maybe MVM. Be that they're buried in a section that nobody dares check, or that they're genuinely too far removed from the core game, and I want to talk, not even playing them myself, right? But I still don't see a reason why they shouldn't exist. It's not like any Valve dev time that would be used to fix the bot issue or something like that would be getting wasted, because you can't really waste anything that ain't there to begin with, and the content is community made anyway. How do you define this core TF2 though? There are so many vastly different ways to experience the game and vast amounts of people that choose to do so. Is it truly fair to dismiss all of this underwater section of the iceberg in favor of what most people play? Even this core has so many different game modes that differ in the way they play. Are people who enjoy playing competitively or jumping or surfing or enjoy transformative game modes not TF2 players? I'm trying to figure out how to best put this, so let's think about different games, right? What's the core of, say, Call of Duty? Is it the team deathmatch? Is it the campaign? Is it the zombies mode? Is it battle royale? These are all in the same game, made by the devs, and they have their fanatics that enjoy them. I don't know, man, I don't even play that shit, but you know what I mean, right? For some games like, say, Counter-Strike, it's very clearly defined what the core is. There's one game mode, one thing that the esport revolves around, and everything else is just kind of tacked on. Same maps with slightly different game modes, and that's about it. But in TF2, you get so much variety right off the bat, even with officially made stuff, that I can't really agree with dismissing Prophunt as not belonging altogether. There's so much extra to the game even outside of it, with community animations and the entire culture that TF2 inspires. It's so much more than just 12v12 on Borneo for the 600th time. And nobody would ever be able to agree on what the right way to play TF2 is. With so many different ways to experience it, you're inevitably going to have preferences. but that doesn't mean that the rest doesn't exist as well. And it's not like these are super niche. Sure, there might be less people playing them, but it's not like nobody's touching these custom things, right? I especially gotta appreciate Fishstick for arguing his point really well here, because at the end of the day, I basically agree that just haphazardly tossing these game modes into matchmaking without any extra care might as well do nothing. Sure, people want new content, but leaving it to languish in the worst way possible is arguably worse. And you know, for a final point, I think it's really interesting that you bring up Fortnite-ification, because before seeing people discuss this stuff here, I hadn't even thought of it. And curiously, I don't really understand why you make it out to be a bad thing, because hear me out, okay? I know TF2 fans can get a little antsy when you mention certain other cartoonish looking games, but if they do stuff better, then there's no shame in taking notes. We copied matchmaking when Overwatch came out, for better or for worse, so why not modernize user-generated content a little bit as well? Because I think Fortnite actually does this really fucking well. Giving players a better tool to create stuff with is only part of the process, and we got that with VScript, but you also need to streamline the ability for creators to share their creations and for users to play them. As someone who's been playing Fortnite on and off for the past couple of years now, ever since they removed building, Battle Royale just gets a little stale sometimes, so the ability to just switch it up immediately with next to no hurdle at all if you still want to play a game with your buds is kind of incredible. Now imagine if TF2 had a system similar to this. Instead of scavenging through an antique server browser and hoping that maybe, just maybe, something custom you'd actually want to play just so happens to be hosted on a server right now, you could instead just boot up a custom map through the workshop, through Steam, with or without friends, and have fun there. Sure, this wouldn't solve the issue of community servers bleeding players, but at the very least it would give the creators of these maps and nowadays game modes a lot more attention and recognition for their work with a much lower barrier of entry. Now, I will concede that Fortnite obviously has a much larger player base, and as far as I know, some sort of revenue sharing system as well, on top of just horrid amounts of abysmal slop. I don't really know how that would work, but I'm not here to iron out the details either. This is literally just me spitballing some ideas that I think are cool to think about, right? We already have these systems in place. You can host games through Steam without exposing your IP or putting yourself at any risk, and several games make use of systems like this for multiplayer purposes, whether by Valve or not. So nothing's really stopping a system like this from being implemented in TF2. Servers can already load workshop maps, so where's the holdup? Well, obviously, because nobody at Valve actually wants to work on this godforsaken game anymore. Duh. But it sure sounds like a utopian solution that would solve a lot of the issues that people have voiced here, right? And wouldn't you know it, they actually went and implemented it, at least on some basic level. And because I took so damn long to get this video done, I can't even claim credit for it now. And I ain't even gotta say it, because you were probably thinking it, and that paragraph was originally quite a bit longer, but Valve has also literally just dropped the entire TF2 SDK on us, source code and all, making developing large-scale TF2 mods easier than ever before. And beyond being immediately impactful for stuff like TF2 Classic or Open Fortress, being able to now operate at an official level, this is absolutely monumental. And it just loops back to what I said earlier about the community effectively running things now, right? Valve is providing us with the tools to create cool shit much better than before, and they can go work on stuff that they actually give a damn about. They're clearly finally signing off from the game, and honestly, probably should have done so quite a while sooner instead of letting us linger in limbo for almost a decade. So what's different now? Because here's what this whole thing has taught me, a little realization I came to in the wake of all of this. What the average player nowadays expects from TF2 and what I expected from the game in the past and still do to an extent are vastly different things, and I don't really know what to stock this up to. Am I the anomaly in the path I took through the game throughout the years? Is the average player just significantly newer and only starting post-matchmaking has an impact on it? Is it just an age thing? Is the average player nowadays just not as willing to go out of their comfort zone? I mean, I've gotten less willing to try new stuff all the time as I've gotten older and have less free time, so maybe there is something to that. All I can really tell is that people seemingly hold TF2 to modern standards that other games fulfill, which is something that's really hard for me to conceptualize in my head. The game is nearly 2 decades old. The fact that it's still around at all is already crazy in and of itself, so I don't really mind the lack of some modern creature comforts. And as a veteran of the game, I can't really put myself in the shoes of somebody picking it up for the first time in the last few years and expecting it to be exactly like any other free-to-play game they may have encountered before. Now, originally this disconnect got me thinking about taking a more analytical approach to figure out people's relationships with the game. I even came up with a couple of questions that I was planning to ask people from all kinds of walks of life in TF2 that would then provide an interesting summary of their experiences. Because let's be honest, especially if you stuck with the game for as long as I did, a significant portion of your formative years are locked up inside of it, whether you like it or not. I even went as far as recording some interviews during TF Connect 2023 with absolutely horrid audio, by the way, but ended up completely cutting the idea of using them for a cute little compilation of responses because the scope of the video completely outgrew that initial idea. This video is already long enough and has taken me far too much time to get done, so adding in another scientific research element on top of it would have just complicated things even further. Now, this is mainly just an excuse because I'm a lazy piece of shit, but I'll put the questions on screen here so you can ask them yourself if you feel like it, because the few responses I did get were expectedly varied, but very interesting to learn about nonetheless. Another reason is that I think addressing general discourse that I've observed over the past couple of years is far easier to pull off in the scope of this video. So let's talk about some misunderstandings. Between the few responses I bothered to gather and general discourse I've encountered, I think it's also apt to mention something that's bugged me for a little while, because I think it illustrates this disconnect in the way people approach the game kind of well. A poignant example, in my opinion, is the broader community's view of competitive TF2 and the just fathomless amount of misconceptions that exist surrounding it. Please do note that I'm not actually trying to single out any one specific take or opinion here, because there's probably always somebody drumming up something. These are just observations that I've made over years and years, and I see talked about in circles that I happen to frequent, so I don't even know if these are all from the same source or even common takes or just a vocal minority, which is far more likely. Because realistically, the average TF2 player doesn't even give a shit about this whole issue to begin with. They're completely agnostic with regards to this, right? The ones that do seem to harbor some sort of innate hatred around competitive TF2 seem to have their minds made up around a lot of misconceptions though. Now, I've already mentioned how nobody but Valve is responsible for the travesty that is competitive matchmaking. Now, did them trying to cater to a more competitive audience lead them to misplace their efforts? Maybe, but them also ignoring any and all feedback that would have made it better didn't help the cause either. The problem is that it just pains me to see the competitive community scapegoated for something that they had literally zero fault in by people who have never once even played a match or a season or felt the need to interface with somebody who has. A far greater issue, though, in my opinion at least, is the seemingly insurmountable rift between the player bases. The average competitive game has so little in common with a 12v12 pub, it may as well be a completely different game altogether that just so happens to share some common mechanics. Class limits, weapon bans, specific maps that are played, rollouts, actual team coordination, a meta, and off classes. There's a lot to wrap your head around if you're completely outside of it. And it seems like people are arbitrarily neutering the experience of the game in the name of competition and fairness. So obviously it seems alien to you if you enjoy playing Engineer or Pyro exclusively. Although, there's a game mode for you too. But here's the thing. None of the weird or seemingly arbitrary limitations that competitive imposes upon you are randomly chosen. This dreaded meta exists for a reason, and all these rule sets evolved very naturally over the course of over 17 years as people tried to figure out how to make playing the game competitively work. It's a consensus arrived at by thousands of people over nearly 2 decades, and it's still ever changing. There's constant discussions being had about which weapons to ban or unban, which maps to cycle in and out of map pools, etc. A lot of the stagnant feel that competitive may have is simply driven by this flowchart that starts with 6v6 being the most convenient starting point. It's enough players to still make teamwork matter, but not too many to make organizing one hell of a fucking task. Because if you've ever played Highlander, you know how it's like. Trying to get 18 people to join the same server for an organized match is nearly impossible. It's already hard enough to get 12 people sometimes. This player count then drives which game modes and maps can reasonably be played. If they're too large, there just isn't enough meat to go around to cover all the ground. And if the objectives are too out of the way, then somebody on the attacking team just doesn't get to play for an entire round, like in, say, Payload, which isn't particularly fun. Alternatively, if they're too easy to defend, you can fall into the joy of fun stalemates, where nothing really happens at all. Both riveting to play and watch. And then this choice of game modes drives which classes work best, leading to the specialist and generalist split that we see currently, where some classes are simply always good because of the good package of speed and damage they have, while others are more situational, depending on the circumstances and the map to work, and usually not worth running full time unless you want to put yourself at a disadvantage. When it comes to banning unlocks, there's usually pretty sound reasoning behind most of them when it comes to the general flow of the game. When something is either so powerful that it overshadows every other option, or when your opponent runs it and you have to run it too. I feel like this old video by Woolen gets brought up all the time in discussions like these, and it's decently outdated by now, but he still does a magnificent job explaining why certain weapons are banned, and it's probably quite insightful for somebody who just has no idea why it is the way it is. Let's switch gears though, because I'm getting way too sidetracked talking about why comp is the way it is. It addresses some of the main criticisms that get levied against it, but there's more stuff I want to talk about. Because I think a lot of the hateful sentiment also stems from this distaste in modern day gaming for tryhards due to the rise of esports. If you're just trying to casually have some fun without trying your very best every single match, but are forced to because of skill-based matchmaking even when you're not trying to be competitive, yeah, that'll sour your mood for sure. TF2 doesn't even have skill-based matchmaking for the most part, so if you just end up getting your shit rocked by somebody who has 3 times your playtime and done some basic competitive gameplay, that will sour your opinion on them for sure. I know what it's like as well. For instance, I used to love playing GeoGuessr back in the day, just guessing on merit alone and seeing how much of a score you can get off of that. And then that Rainbolt guy shows up, blessed be his soul, and suddenly everybody's a metagamer that can tell you exactly which road in Africa you're on by looking at the car's mirrors and compression artifacts from the camera. Nothing is sacred anymore. Look, what I'm trying to get at is that simply not liking competitive is completely fine if you have genuine reasons to. It obviously is not perfect and has its fair share of compromises and drawbacks to it. A perfect PvP game cannot exist. Someone always has to win and someone has to lose, and well, usually losing isn't all that fun, but you can at least make it less bullshit or annoying, right? It may seem boring to some, and if you don't jive with the limitations or don't want to try your hardest, that's completely valid. Or maybe you just haven't found a good way into it yet because of the barrier of entry, which is also something the competitive community is keenly aware of. They've already tried making competitive as accessible as possible, but at the end of the day, nobody really wants to compromise their own fun or enjoyment just to appeal to some potential new player who probably doesn't care anyway. But if your reason for hating competitive is that you got pub stomped by a Prem player once, then I'm sorry, you gotta grow up a little bit, man. There's always going to be somebody who's better at the game than you. You'll probably never be the Magnus Carlsen of anything, except for maybe gooning, but even competitive players just want to shut off their brains sometimes and just go on a pub. The idea that they should only stick to their own circles and play against people of their own skill is very difficult to justify when you realize the player count of the community you're talking about here. Even in skill-based matchmaking, you wouldn't be safe from this. Smurfing exists, and you can always end up just going against somebody who is just better than you on skill alone. That's just how PvP games work. But either way, scapegoating the competitive community for all ills that ever befell TF2, be that the matchmaking that we hated just as much, or weapon changes that we had zero impact on, and that didn't even change whether these weapons were being used in actual competitive matches. Competitive never saw the actual support from Valve that it would have needed to grow into something more than just this niche little thing that a couple hundred people meet up for a couple of times a year and share some drinks over. And it's also not like it's the only subset of the community that's ever suffered from a bit of neglect now, is it? But let's shift gears, because this is something where it gets pretty interesting. When I was conceptualizing this video and taking down notes, Fix TF2 was merely a thought and nowhere near on the horizon. So this is another example of where taking forever to finish this video has lent itself to expanding the script even further. Now, initially I thought fixed TF2 would be about as successful as safe TF2 was, that is, utterly pointless. But at the same time, I'd see no reason to disparage it. Because at the end of the day, who cares if it's just a Hail Mary shot in the dark to maybe get Valve to care for a little while? The community's got nothing to lose anyway, and you might as well try to swing things in your favor instead of doing nothing all day, right? And let me reiterate again, TF2 is dead to the public. We already talked about this. So nobody really expects Valve to support it. The precedent for live service games nowadays is that their service survive for a couple of years post-launch before the game is completely forgotten about. So TF2 is already unique on that front. Which is also why many people are always surprised to hear just how popular the game actually still is. But the perceived relevance of the game certainly works against movements like these. It almost makes the community seem a little entitled of sorts, right? I mean, I've been guilty of this reality pill train of thought before, so I know where it stems from. What I'm trying to say is no matter whether you care about TF2 or bots or casual or any of that or not, there's no real downside to a movement like this. Does it seem a little entitled or cringe from an outsider's perspective? Yeah, absolutely. But what do you gain from disparaging it? Like, I enjoy being a hater just as much as the next guy, but realistically, TF2 players will never shut the fuck up, no matter the outcome. We're just annoying like that. Either way, fixed TF2 would have had a pretty straightforward conclusion, right? Valve doesn't really want to fix that internet theory becoming a reality in its games, and the game still makes money anyway, so it's really hard to justify the amount of work needed to fix something that would require so much treadmill running. So the fact that they actually bothered to do something, at least for a little bit, is astonishing. Not to sing them any high praises for finally doing the bare minimum maintenance to upkeep a game they still wish to earn a little bit of money off of, however little it may be, instead of just leaving it to fester and fend for itself. But it is noteworthy how Valve has done more for TF2 this summer alone than they did in the previous 7 years! They were indubitably working on this fix for a while, because there is zero shot that a little bit of community noise being drummed up suddenly materialized something out of thin air at the lethargic offices at Valve. Which makes it all the more impressive and awe-inspiring that this fast-tracked fix kinda just stuck around as well as it did. I'm still a little skeptical about the longevity of this fix, especially if we end up growing complacent again and overtly joyous that Valve finally threw us a little crumb. But it has been a few months now, and I've yet to encounter, in as little as I've played, any bots or see anybody complain about them at all. But you gotta stay on top of it. Fighting cheaters and the like in games is always an ongoing battle, so if the game is playable for a significant amount of time, that would be noteworthy. And please, for the love of God, keep holding Valve accountable. Stop buying keys and cosmetics. It sounds silly to boycott TF2, but it's actually really easy because I've been doing it for years. Though that's personal because I've never really cared about ugly hats and cosmetics, but still. This is the only realistic way you can ever really get Valve to listen. But I'm also just retreading ground that's already been laid out before. Other people have iterated this point well enough already, and I agree that even if it's not necessary right now, should issues flare up again, it is absolutely the course of action to take. Because sucking up to Valve and never being allowed to criticize anything they do is what got us here in the first place. It's gotten so far beyond just Stockholm Syndrome or a weird parasocial relationship with a corporate entity, it may as well be some sort of bastardized fetish. You should obviously aim to be civil and reasonable whenever you voice criticism of anything, naturally. But being overly positive and living in delusions like Valve is gonna come fix everything eventually are just as annoying. But I'm getting ahead of myself on that. A little bit more on that later. Now let's shift gears for a minute to have a little thought experiment in this situation. That being that Valve completely drops support for the game because of boycotts. Because it's a fear that I see voiced so frequently in this situation, and I also wrote all of this ages ago, so I might as well include it. Obviously, they never would, right? They have no track record of truly doing so without at least replacing the previous product, like with CS, however well that went. So this is just imaginary, but it's fun to think about regardless. There's like 3 ways they could do it. The first, and by far the worst, is them just simply pulling the plug on everything. Every single TF2 related server, items and all, gone forever. And I don't think I need to tell you why this is both implausible but also impossible, as its consequences would be absolutely catastrophic. Setting the precedent that none of the colorful pixels you spend real money on are actually owned by you and can be taken away at a moment's notice is probably not a good idea when you've got one of the primordial online economies on your hands. The fallout would be so cataclysmic, not just for Valve's other games, but probably the entire industry at large, like say Steam and owning your games. You would feel the quakes everywhere, and any goodwill in Valve would evaporate in an instant. So obviously they can't do this, even if they wanted to. So the second best option is a midway point where they simply can't keep the bots away forever and decide to just pull the plug on casual matchmaking, effectively returning to quick play, but without Valve service to fill up the pool. Now, besides returning to the issues that quick play has, this doesn't actually sound like a terrible solution. Community servers, whether you like them or not, can and will fill the void with basically vanilla-like offerings, and more importantly, are better equipped to moderate and deal with the bots in real time. It's not the same experience, nothing can be, but I am actually more curious if this would be an acceptable compromise to make for most people. Because the third option is basically what we had since Jungle Inferno. No more meaningful content updates or bug fixes. The game is just left to fend for itself, with casual being rendered unplayable. Which would mean it's actually basically the same outcome as the second case. So really ask yourself this. Would you be willing to make the compromise and play on community servers if there were simply no other ways of playing TF2 anymore? Or would you just move on and play something different? This is usually the fate old legacy games like TF2 are relegated to. A lot of online multiplayer games, many of which younger than TF2, have long lost any semblance of official support or servers, some of which even getting shut down altogether. Of course, it's Ubisoft. And they're exclusively playable through only community efforts. It's actually a miracle that TF2 has stayed just popular enough and is owned by just the right company to have staved off such a fate. Literally any other developer would have shut down TF2 servers in like 2014. There's no way they would have kept that shit running for this long. Although now that I think about it, they probably also would have tried to make 2 ill-fated sequels by now, and I don't really know where to take it at this point. Look, what I'm trying to say is that it's an absolute miracle that TF2 still has any semblance of official support and servers, because it's definitely not the industry standard anymore. And with Valve continuing to expect to make a little bit of money, albeit not a lot, expecting them to at least put in the bare minimum amount of effort to keep the game running smoothly isn't completely unreasonable. I know there's a precious few other games in TF2's age bracket nowadays that still see more official developer support for their increasingly aging and niche games than TF2 does from Valve, so it's clearly possible. You obviously shouldn't delude yourself into expecting new content or big updates, but at least expecting timely responses to issues that have plagued the game for quite a while is very reasonable in my opinion. Although it seems TF2 isn't the only thing at Valve relegated to this fate. Matter of fact, it seems like anything that isn't Steam or cutting-edge hardware or in any tangential way related to Dota is just left to rot in a ditch. Like, they just released CS2
2 years ago.
It hasn't even reached parity with CSGO yet, and it's already getting the TF2 treatment of little drip-feed content packs, despite being one of the most popular games in the world. I get it, man. They would rather just work on Deadlock. It's Smite with a different coat of paint, and while it's not explicitly Dota, it's literally made by the Dota guy, and it's also just another MOBA. Valve can't help themselves, man. They just gotta keep going back to the MOBA well. Whatever, dude. Look, I'm gonna get sidetracked here, but Deadlock doesn't even look that bad. I mean, I would probably never enjoy it because even though it does away with a lot of the stuff I don't like about MOBAs, it still seems like you need a damn degree to actually be able to play it properly.
Like, I booted it up, I did the tutorial, and was like, okay, it's a shooter, but with mobile mechanics, I get it. And then I went to a shop, saw 800 different icons with descriptions, and immediately uninstalled. I don't have the time and patience to learn all of this stuff anymore, man. I'm no esports gamer, I'm 26. Not to mention that the core MOBA aspect that stays is the crowd controls, meaning that outplaying your opponent is much less reliant on skills like aiming, and more so on who can develop the most degenerate stunlock build. I'm sure it's fun if you want to put in the effort, but it certainly ain't for me. Probably more watchable as a MOBA than previous ones I've ever witnessed, though. At least I can kind of tell what's going on the screen sometimes when I watch somebody play, which is a big development for MOBAs in my eyes. Anyway, just felt like getting some thoughts about Deadlock out of the way, because at the end of the day, I was just as confused about why Valve would work on this instead of fixing up their existing games as anybody else. But now I'm actually just kind of happy that they're working on something new again that looks like it won't die on release or only appeal to a very few select people. Alright, I've enjoyed yapping about all of this, but I also gotta draw it to some sort of closure eventually. And you may find yourself casting aspersions upon that statement looking at what's left in the video, but bear with me, okay? Because there's another set of observations that I've made with regards to TF2's stagnant nature and the effects that it has on the community. To be fair, with any game that loses official support or has official support so meaningless that it may as well not exist, the community always ends up having to make their own fun and keep engaged somehow. But it's really interesting to me how with TF2 this has seemingly devolved into this need to discuss things that do not matter whatsoever. Like, why is Sniper suddenly an issue when he was fine 20 years ago when the game was first designed? Is he unfun to play against if the other guy is good and hits his shots? Yeah, of course he is. So is any class when the other guy is better than you. And look, I don't even disagree with some of the points that get raised in a discussion like this. There's always curious and interesting discussion to be had about game balance, but at the end of the day, none of it matters. It's all just pure theory. The game is not getting updated to address something as fundamental as class balance that has stood unwavering since launch. If you really hate Sniper that much, you can always just host your own server where you neuter him to your needs. This is just emblematic of a greater thing I've noticed, because due to the sheer lack of anything meaningful left to talk about anymore, you start reaching for straws and fabricating controversies about topics just to get some sort of discourse started. Like, why are we still having discussions about overinflated player numbers with regards to how many of these are idler bots? I thought we figured this out years ago. Why does it even matter anyway? Is your enjoyment of the game directly tied to whether these bots are around or not? It's not like they're taking up any server space or making it harder to get into a game. If they all disappeared tomorrow, there would be no noticeable impact in the game whatsoever. I don't watch much TF2 content anymore at all, so I don't know how true the statement I'm about to make is. Think of it as purely anecdotal for the time being. But I have a text document lying around somewhere with video ideas that I came up with in like 2017 and just never got around to making into anything. And I'm pretty sure for at least some of them I've yet to see anybody come up with similar stuff and turn it into videos. Instead, you got motherfuckers reviewing weapons like the Babyface's Blaster for the 7th time. A weapon, by the way, that has remained unchanged since 2015. And in my opinion is probably still just about alright sometimes, but a worse scattergun in most situations, in case you were curious about my opinion. Or people genuinely trying their hardest to make random-ass terrible weapons not be complete dog water anymore with proposed balance changes, which, more power to them. I mean, you're getting content out of it even if it doesn't matter at all in the grand scheme of things, right? But are we really scraping the bottom of the barrel this much already? There's absolutely nothing else to talk about with regards to the game anymore? Although it is curious how the gas passer fix and it now working with the neon sign could theoretically be considered a balance change, although I still never knew this was a bug to begin with because both of these weapons are still pretty situational and bad on the best of days. But I guess that's cool. It probably gave
TF2 YouTubers something to talk about for a couple of weeks? Basically what I'm trying to say is it seems like we've kind of hit a dead end with what TF2 content can even be made nowadays, doesn't it? Like, you can make funny pub clip compilations, it's nothing extraordinary, but it is the soul of the game in some ways, and I'm sure there's no harm, no foul with that. Or you can make heavily edited video essay type stuff with a whole lot of yapping and no actual point being made. The irony of this statement, by the way, is absolutely not lost upon me because that's basically what I've been doing as we speak. I know it's like you just gotta cover up any imperfections in your script writing with a fancy little edit to capture the attention of the zoomers, some sort of cutaway gag that nobody will ever see coming. Don't like somebody? Send them a pipe bomb! I get it. No, I get it. Now again, it may sound like I'm singling out a specific example here, but do note I don't actually watch any TF2 content at all anymore. This is all just a very surface level and dismissive and exaggerated impression that I get about the state of YouTube videos about TF2 whenever a video randomly pops up in my recommended section. I just think it's funny to say, I don't actually watch that shit, but this is how the titles and thumbnails of your video made me feel, but whatever, let's move on. So allow me to make an appeal to all of my colleagues here, as rich as that's gonna sound coming from the guy that just spent the past hour yapping about fuck all and used to be the wacky maps connoisseur. But there are unfathomable riches still to be found within TF2, untapped veins of pure diamonds that have gone underappreciated for way too long given the amount of effort that was put into them. As comfortable and safe as it may be to just boot up casual for a couple of hours and collect clips or talk about a dogshit weapon that hasn't had its stats changed since 2017, going a little bit out of your way to discover new stuff can reignite a love for TF2 that you never even knew you had. Their experience is just incomparable to the mediocrity of booting up Badwater for the gorillionth time. And I'm not saying it's for everyone, of course it isn't, and I'm also retreading very familiar ground here. But if normal old TF2 has ever felt a little boring to you, or God forbid, the bots ever make a resurgence, there are still so many incredible experiences in TF2 that can be had if you're willing to look for them. Look, if you've watched my older stuff, you probably already know where this is headed. I've got to give my boys a shout out again. I've been redsun.tf's biggest shooter for years and probably will be for as long as it's around. And times must also be truly desperate over there when they're begging the guy who doesn't even really play TF2 anymore, let alone makes any content about it, for another shout out. And yet here I am, fulfilling my contractual obligations. I'm doing it for free. Matter of fact, the majority of gameplay you've seen throughout this video has been from redsun, as I've gotten back into it for the past couple of weeks, and it's just as much fun as it always was. And while I've gained some more appreciation for the zero commitment drop-in nature of casual matchmaking, mainly due to the novelty after not interfacing with the game for so long, it still doesn't even compare. If you consider TF2 to be one of your main games, something that you play a lot, then you are, in my opinion at least, doing yourself a disservice by not checking out custom modded stuff like this, to just see if you'd enjoy it. It's the closest you could get to touching TF2's soul, the very essence of what defines the heart of TF2. Because in my opinion, in a game as customizable as this, from the way your character looks to even third-party stuff like a config that makes your game look like shit, which is funny as fuck by the way, or a custom HUD, or other mods, why wouldn't you want to also customize your gameplay experience a little further? Whether it be redsun and getting to experience novel gameplay unlike anywhere else, or communities like custom TF2 weapons with, as the name suggests, just hundreds upon hundreds of new weapon concepts to mess around with, considering we're never getting any new official ones anyways. This is basically my appeal to fellow content creators. If you're already looking to make funny pub clip compilations, then something like redsun will absolutely turbocharge your workflow. You're gonna get so much footage so easily. And if you like balance discussions, you can easily find yourself a server to test out your ideas on. I know it's a little embarrassing that I don't have a specific example here, but I don't even know what I could potentially mention anymore because I've been out of the loop for so long that more and more communities have just straight up shut down due to a lack of interest from either players or the hosts to keep going. It's a bummer because custom stuff like this is a dying breed in modern gaming, and unfortunately also in TF2, where despite being a game ran by its community for most of its existence, The player base at large seems woefully uninterested in seeing what the community actually has to offer, still clinging onto anything that is remotely considered official, in fear of this dark forest that lies beyond. And sometimes it may require unparalleled bravery to venture into that unknown, but the experiences you get to have are likely to be memorable.
Or you could just ignore all of it, because TF2 isn't supposed to be Gmod, I guess. It's up to you. Something Plato's Cave. As a closing remark, if you do actually plan on checking out Red Sun and don't want to be constantly inundated with custom music and sounds, I recommend going to their website, logging in and disabling those, because people love spamming them. Beyond that though, hop on, have some fun, enjoy something new, and maybe even make a couple new friends. Look, all of this to say that in a game like TF2 that is becoming increasingly niche and exclusively run by its community, letting the stagnation drive you mad and start useless drama and infighting over menial shit will only accelerate the game's inevitable demise. TF2 may be forever, it's highly unlikely that the servers will ever be shut down officially, but Valve's minuscule attention isn't. The bots can come back. The drizzle of new slop content can stop eventually, and all that will be left are the players. And if you're too busy antagonizing too many people, you'll be pushed out of what's left of the community of the game that you love so dearly. Because let's face it, if you're still playing TF2 in lieu of more modern games that are officially supported and have massive player bases, and that you could even play with normie friends of yours, you're exclusively in this for the love of the game.
There is nothing quite like TF2. You've heard that statement many a time before, but nothing has the same legacy or the same appeal to scratch the same itch quite the same way. Yes, imperfect facsimiles that try to fill a similar niche, but they're never quite the same. And you can move on from TF2 and play other stuff. That's obviously where I've been, but eventually you can hear that siren calling you from afar, and it would suck so much if you've burned too many bridges to try and get back to her. I'm not saying you should unconditionally get along with everyone, God no. But at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, everyone that still plays this godforsaken game is connected by the same strain of mental illness that we call wacky hats. Just try to be reasonable, I guess. Use your head, right? And somebody's being critical or controversial with a hot take, they might just be rage baiting, but maybe see where they're coming from. Maybe there's an actual discussion to be had here. There's usually at least some sort of nugget of value in there. Of course, nobody could agree on everything, and I'm not saying you should, but cutting yourself off into different encampments, completely unwilling to interface with other parts of the community, doesn't really help anybody either. Whether it be nostalgia or genuine insanity, sticking with a game this old in spite of the plethora of reasons against it is not normal, average behavior. We're all a little insane, you might as well embrace that. I genuinely have no idea what I'm talking about, by the way. This is all completely pulled out of my ass. Just a schizophrenic and disjointed collection of thoughts that I've had over the years and felt like dumping out somewhere in some way. It's just kind of painful to me, you know, seeing the core of what makes TF2 so special, the community, tearing itself apart over menial shit all the time.
And you just heard me mention it there, by the way, but to bring it back around, in my opinion, the core of TF2 isn't some arbitrary game mode limitation or even way to play the game, but instead the community that has made the game what it is today. The things that they've created, the friends and memories that they made, and the good that they brought into the world, that is the core of TF2, not just the gameplay. And while you have to acknowledge the good with the bad, like some subset, believe it or not, they are still TF2 players in a way, of absolute losers trying to occupy official servers, or another trying to squeeze as much money as possible out of workshop submissions with low effort slop because Valve lacks any sort of quality assurance, or another that is convinced that the competitive community is responsible for all ills that ever befell TF2 because they want to play the objective in the, at the end of the day, objective-based game. None of these negative aspects exclusively define the game either. In a small, tight-knit community where everyone kind of knows everyone in a way, these flares of toxicity can come to feel more defining than they truly are. And with so many different ways to experience the game, people will inevitably butt heads as ideologies clash. But whether you like it or not,
you're all still kind of enjoying the same game at the end of the day. Does this mean that TF2's got a higher concentration of toxicity and you'll be harassed for playing the game however you choose? I don't know, probably not, but it might feel that way, right? Due to the overall lower player base and the fact that the game has been around for so long, leading to the average player maybe that still interfaces with the game being a lot more passionate and likely to argue their point and perceived as toxic thusly, but that's not unique to TF2 in any way. It's tough to measure toxicity objectively anyway. Harassment over some menial shit, yeah, that's pretty bad. I don't think anybody would argue against it. Somebody having an opinion you don't jive with and unwilling to hear out counterpoints, a little rude, sure, but it's not necessarily toxic. Past examples of toxicity, driving out somebody of the community needlessly? Yeah, that's fair, but how much of that can be stocked up to the time period it happened in? Because I've seen people and places and opinions change drastically over the years. The world is ever changing, and obviously TF2 is no exception to that. Toxic people that drive out and divide communities get driven out themselves eventually. This is nothing unique to TF2 whatsoever. And I think treating it in this monolithic manner, where everything is unchanging and nobody's able to learn, is just as damaging of a viewpoint. Over the years that I've stuck with this game, I've touched nearly every corner of the community and at least interfaced with what it had to offer on a surface level, just making friends along the way in all kinds of different places. Even though I doubt there are many other people that have taken a similar journey and can form a similar view on the game, it has at least given me this understanding of where all of these different forces are pulling from. And the community being left in this limbo state and not knowing what it wants may very well be the game's greatest issue, but just as it always has been and can inevitably only be going forward, the community is also by far the game's greatest asset. We've been making our own fun for years on end already, so why not just fully embrace that instead of still living in the delusion that Valve Senpai will come save us one day from this abyss? There's so much amazing potential, and all we have to do is actually seize it instead of spinning in circles for years on end debating things that do not matter and will never change. Just enjoy the game while you still can, dude. You're gonna get old, and I don't want my goat to get old. Right, so I've decided I'm gonna film this last part outside. It's a beautiful day, as you can see, and it's actually kind of bearable today. It's not as hot as it was a couple of days ago, and it's definitely not just me performatively going outside so that I can say that I've touched grass. No, not at all. I mean, look at me. Look how pale I am. I'm probably overexposing the camera by reflecting all the sunlight. No, but jokes aside, why am I recording this outro outside? Well, I'm doing this actually at the end after I've done everything else with the video, right? I've finished editing, I've even done a test render and everything. There's just some little finishing touches maybe that are left, and I also did it outside here in the middle of nowhere because I feel like I look like a tool with a camera in my hand talking to my phone. So, you know, at least I don't want anybody to see that. And I hope that the wind isn't going to make the audio unbearable either. I guess future me will have to worry about that in about an hour's time. But yeah, that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching and sticking it out this long. It's truly been a long time in the making to get this done, and I hope that you've enjoyed it in some ways. Another reason why I've decided to record this outro at the very end after I've done everything else is because I didn't want to get blindsided by another announcement being made by Valve and suddenly derailing another point I wanted to make in the video. Thankfully that didn't really happen, but just yesterday they, announced the fact that they want to do another MVM update, which is pretty cool, by the way, after 12 years, right? If you want my opinion about it, I think it's neat, but also please do not delude yourself into expecting anything more than just some new maps being put into a new rotation of tour. Bug flew in my mouth. It's just going to be a couple of new maps, right? A couple of maps brought into a new tour. I would be very surprised if they did anything beyond that, like new Aussies or anything like that. Now, it's still cool if you're, gambling for Aussies, you get some new variety to try it out on, some new maps and all that stuff, but that's it, right? Don't get ahead of yourselves. That's all it's gonna be, realistically at least. But yeah, still, it's cool, and it's the main reason why it is at the end of the video. But if anything that I said in this video resonated with you, if you vibed with anything, that's awesome, right? I hope that it did. Because at the end of the day, this was all very random and disjointed and just all over the place, me just talking about random stuff, right? And even more so, if you disagree with anything I said, if you take vehement opposition to something that I said, feel free to let me know. I'm always open for discussion. I love hearing other people's opinions about stuff that I have opinions on, because it's kind of curious, right? I don't even play TF2 anymore, and I just made an over hour-long video talking about a bunch of shit that's been happening in the game for the past couple of years that I feel like having opinions on for no fucking reason. I don't think anybody even cares, but you know, that's why I left this at the end of the video where I'm reflecting on the process and all that, because I don't know if anybody's even gonna watch this for. But you know, it's I'm always open for some civil discussion. If you have anything you want to say, anything you take extreme issue with, and something that I've overlooked or didn't think about, just bumped a butterfly with my phone, feel free to let me know. I'm always loving to hear what people have to say, right? Beyond that though, yeah, this was quite the video in the making, huh? For reference, I first started taking down notes for this back in like November of 2023. Just in case you were curious just how long it took me to get this stuff done. Now obviously a lot has happened in the meantime, and I didn't actually work on the video tirelessly for 18 whole months. I mean, it's not that good, right? It doesn't look like I worked on it for 18 months. But I'd come back to it periodically, you know, new stuff to add into the script and all that sort of stuff, and it just grew and grew and grew over time. And even, you know, with other stuff coming up, life throwing a few haymakers here and there recently, although we thugged that out, we're getting through it and it's getting better again. Getting that out of the way. You know, finally having this done again, it's nice. And it's actually like, it's shown me just how much I actually still enjoy making videos. It's really like revitalized my enjoyment in the whole process of creating something, of, you know, figuring something out. And it's fun. So that being said, yeah, this might act as like the revival of this channel a little bit. It's been a bit quiet for my online front, right? But I do want to make more stuff. I have many ideas swirling around in here where I'm like, that would be a cool video. I could totally talk about that. It's just a matter of actually putting it out there, right? And I think even though it's not going to be TF2, some of it isn't even going to be necessarily gaming related. I can't rule out anything, right? Maybe there'll be another TF2 video in a year's time, I don't know. But if you like what I'm doing, awesome. Stick around, there might be more of it. And more importantly, this is the biggest part, and I don't think most people even knew about this at all unless they were following what I was doing extremely closely throughout like 2023. But I actually just have a second channel. Now it's also been lying dormant for a little while, but back in 2023, I took it upon myself as like a little challenge to see if I could do daily uploads. So I chose the medium, the vessel of making an Isaac video every day, just uploading a random Isaac run of me just yapping over shit and just posting that there. And I did not miss a single day. 365 days worth of Isaac runs went up on that channel, a couple of other videos as well. So let me swap arms, my shoulder's getting tired. So, you know, like, there's a lot of backlog there if you're interested in that already. But I think that I'm gonna start using that channel again for the type of stuff that I used to make here. Even though I don't think I'm gonna go back to making like stream highlights and funny moments compilations here. I wanna leave this channel for more of the heavily edited and video essay stuff. I'm a white boy at the end of the day, right? But I do think I still enjoy making the funny moment stuff. I play video games a lot. It's like my hobby. It's my one hobby that I truly have in life, right? The one thing I enjoy the most. And I just wanna share that with the world, you know? I just wanna have fun. So I'm gonna start posting more on that channel. Feel free to check it out if you're interested. If you vibe with the kind of stuff I made from like 2018 to like 2022, like the funny moments, just me playing games with my buds type of stuff, that's the place to go. Enjoy that. On that note as well, I think I want to pick up streaming a little bit more again as well. So check out the Twitch down in the description. Might even co-stream to YouTube, who knows? But yeah, it's gonna be a lot more stuff. I've now this is basically just a long break, right? I just took a long break and I realized that I actually still really enjoy creating stuff. You know, it's one of the few passions I actually have in life, that I enjoy doing stuff. And even though I do not want to delude myself or live under the impression that I'm ever gonna do this shit as a job. Man can have hobbies, right? You can enjoy what you do. There's no harm, no foul in that. So, yeah. I hope that's something that anybody can be interested in, I suppose. We'll see, right, as time goes. But that's my life update. That's where I've been. And that's this behemoth, colossal video. Just way too much shit going on out of the way. Another thing that I found curious as well, by the way, while making the video, is just this dichotomy in opinion that I constantly had in my head, right? Because on the one hand, I still really care about TF2. I'm still passionate about it. And even though I don't play it much, I cast, I go to LANs, all that stuff, right? I still interface with the game a lot. It is an indispensable, important, and formative part of my life. It's a part of my identity, part of who I am. At least it, formed a lot of my friendships, my relationships with people, etc., etc. But at the same time, I'm far beyond the point where I'm like, I've realized, I've made peace with the fact long ago that I'm never going to be 14 years old playing Team Fortress 2 ever again. And I'm the realist. I came to the conclusion like in 2017, 2018 that like, oh yeah, this game isn't ever going to get anything anymore. Valve has stopped caring. I don't need to delude myself thinking that this game is ever going to get updates or anything like that. It's not going to happen, right? There's no way anything is going to happen with this game. The fact that it's starting to see a slight bit of development again, that's already crazy in and of itself. But I came to the conclusion long ago that I don't need anything else from TF2. I've already gotten all of the enjoyment I could have ever wanted out of it. I've gotten everything I could have possibly wanted out of it. I'm happy with the way it is. And, I've moved on in life in some ways. But at the same time, I still care about this shitty little fucking game too fucking much. And here we are. But yeah, it's been fun to make. And I hope that, something or another was in any way interesting to you. And I hope that the audio of this is in any way usable, because I'm gonna fucking shoot myself with a gun. Oh yeah, but that's it from me for now. Stay tuned. I'm gonna do more stuff. See you around, I suppose.